Well, hello, and thanks for checking out this very special episode of Basic Folk. Today, we are pleased to introduce our listeners to one of our favorite podcasts by sharing an episode in our feed. I truly appreciate an interview where the hosts are basically scholars on their subject, aka they come so prepared, it's wild. Scott and Paul on Songcraft spotlight on songwriters are industry professionals who are super knowledgeable about the songwriting craft, so they come at each of these interviews with a unique perspective. Also, at the top of every episode, they do a current events and catch-up section that lets their sweet buddy chemistry shine. Be prepared to learn and have fun with Scott and Paul from Songcraft. They've interviewed legendary musicians like Smokey Robinson, Steve Earle, Bill Withers, Sean Colvin, Laurie McKenna, Lucinda Williams, and more than 160 others. In this episode of Songcraft, they'll be talking to 9-time Grammy nominee Ani Difranco. She joins Scott and Paul to talk about her career as a fiercely independent singer-songwriter and activist, and share some insights into the social, political, and personal challenges that inspired her honest but hope-filled new studio album, Revolutionary Love. Here we go. Enjoy it. Songcraft Spotlight on Songwriters.
Welcome to Songcraft, Spotlight on Songwriters, a bi-weekly podcast featuring in-depth conversations with and about the creators of lyrics and music that stand the test of time. I'm Scott B. Bomar.
And I'm Paul Duncan. Songcraft is part of the American Songwriter Podcast Network, which can be found at americansongwriter.com.
To make sure you don't miss an episode, please take a moment to subscribe to our show via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You can also keep up with us on social media by searching for one word, Songcraft Show, or visit us at songcraftshow.com.
You're listening to Confluence, an instrumental track from the album Revolutionary Love by our guest on this episode of Songcraft, Ani Difranco. The 9-time Grammy nominee will join us in a few moments to talk about her career as a fiercely independent singer-songwriter and activist, and give us some insights into the social, political, and personal challenges that inspired her honest but hope-filled new studio album.
Today's episode is brought to you by the fine folks at Pearl Snap Studios, the only place for you to go to take your song and have it turned into a quality pitchable recording. And that's not just advertising speak, Scott. It is literally the only place that you can take a song these days and get it demoed.
Well,
I'm pretty confident in that fact.
It's probably the only place that you can get the kind of quality that Justin and his team delivers for the cost. And in fact, not only are Justin's rates really reasonable, he even has a discount for Songcraft listeners. So if you are an aspiring songwriter, or maybe even a songwriter who's got a little success under your belt, but you need some good quality pitchable demos, or maybe something you're not even looking to pitch, you just want to have great recordings of your songs to show off to your friends and brag about your songwriting skills, Justin is your guy.
Yeah, and if none of that sways you, listen to this. It's the only place that you can go and get a demo recorded.
All right, we'll just go with that. It's the only place. There's no other place to get a demo recorded. So if you want a demo, a very professional sounding demo, I might add, of one of your songs or a whole bunch of your songs, go to pearlsnapstudios.com and tell them that Songcraft sent you.
Otherwise, you will not get this demo recorded.
It will not be made, and you want this demo made.
Part 1.
Well, Scott, I don't know when people are going to be listening to this podcast, but for you and I, it's Martin Luther King Day. And that is something we're going to spend some time discussing on this episode. Before we get into that, we also kind of have to acknowledge, as we often do, the passing of a large character in music history. And of course, I'm referring to Phil Spector.
Yes. Passed away over the weekend. He perhaps of COVID-19. I saw some reports. Actually, TMZ said it was COVID-19, and amazingly, TMZ tends to be right most of the time.
Surprisingly, they've turned out to be one of the forefronts in accurate reporting.
Right. So potentially COVID-19. Other sources just said natural causes, but died in prison, indicative of the complicated legacy.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's it's our tendency then to just go in and talk about, his accomplishments and his legacy and history as a producer, but you kind of got to lead with the fact that he's a convicted murderer.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes it, we've had these conversations before, whether, you're talking about Michael Jackson or whoever, but can you separate the artist from the art? How do you appreciate the art without excusing some of the awful things that come to light with some of these people?
Yeah, and does it feel different when you're talking about someone who is, creating the music or giving voice to the music versus someone who was maybe a genius in terms of mic placement or some of the other things that went into creating the wall of sound? I still don't know how to completely separate the artist or the creator or the producer from the music. And I don't know that we can.
Right.
I'm not sure that you can ever just completely cancel the art that someone's made, because it has sort of made its dent and made its mark on society and on music. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that Phil Spector was a brilliant music producer and created some music that has, stood the test of time.
Yeah.
And still simultaneously say, this was a very dark person who, was in prison for good reason.
Yeah. And, I think of, Lana Clarkson, who was the victim, the woman that died at his hand. And, yesterday I was seeing a lot of tributes on Facebook and social media about Phil Spector. And I have some Facebook friends who knew Lana Clarkson. And so I saw some people posting, tributes to her as well, which I think is appropriate to say, hey, an innocent woman lost her life because of Phil Spector. But I also saw Ronnie Spector of the Ronettes, who was Phil's wife for a time, posted something on Facebook that I thought was, insightful. She said he was a brilliant producer, but a lousy husband. And I mean, that's understating it. He was violent. He was abusive. He made her life, hell. She literally escaped like barefoot with nothing. I mean, it was not unlike the Ike and Tina Turner situation. There just hasn't been a Ronnie Spector movie that is emblazoned that idea in our brains, but it was a very similar type of thing. So, but I thought for Ronnie Spector, who kind of endured his violence and his, mental illness, really, to be able to still say, okay, this guy was a lousy husband, but he was a brilliant producer. He was. He left music that is part of the fabric of American culture, and not only as a producer, which he's perhaps the first kind of celebrity producer, but also as a songwriter. I mean, he had his hand in Be My Baby, River Deep Mountain High, Chapel of Love, Spanish Harlem, To Do Ron Ron, Then He Kissed Me. I mean, these songs exist. I mean, they are part of the world of music. They are, part of our culture. And so the fact that the man who brought us this music then later did this unspeakably awful thing, well, his most famous unspeakably awful thing, apparently he did a lot of awful things. But even having done those awful things, we still have this music. So it brings us back to that complicated, separating the artist from their art thing that we've talked about before.
Yeah. And it's sort of, it's hard to find a way to, how do you segue from talking about Phil Spector to talking about Martin Luther King Jr.?
Right.
But I think in a way it does come down to legacy and how do you view legacy? And I think Martin Luther King now is someone that, to take a moment to look at his legacy, and he's had a legacy on music as well. And I think it's something that as time goes by, it doesn't become harder to look at Martin Luther King Jr. with eyes of admiration. It actually becomes easier. I feel like the more in focus some of the problems in our country become, the more necessary his words and his approach become. And I find myself after a year like 2020, just wanting to dive deeper into sort of his peaceful but courageous response to the darkness and hatred all around him.
Yeah, and what a legacy he left. I mean, everybody knows Martin Luther King for the civil rights era. And if you look at most sort of cursory stories about his life, it's like, and then the Civil Rights Act passed, and then he was assassinated. Well, there was a lot of years actually between that, and he was really engaged in nonviolence work. He was a huge advocate for the poor. He was a person who was a crusader for compassion and love and justice. And boy, we could use all three of those things right now.
Yes, we could. I mentioned his influence on music, and I don't think we can find any songs that he wrote that I know of. But I certainly know when you look at some of the artists that we revere, that they were certainly emboldened by his dream and by the things that he said, and you can find it in the music. And I I don't think you'd have to go too far to have these musicians actually acknowledge that. But it got me to thinking: are there some songs out there? We sort of know the ones that are Someday We'll All Be Free, Donny Hathaway, or We Shall Overcome, or even Happy Birthday, the Stevie Wonder song being about Martin Luther King Day. We know so many of those songs. But are there songs about racism in the world and in America that are a little more under the radar, that we're familiar with, that might be worth our listeners checking out today?
The racial justice deep cuts.
There you go. And so while I give you just a moment to think about this, I love to spring these things on you.
I love when you do.
I'm gonna tell mine. I was thinking about it this morning, and it's a song by Stevie Wonder, simply called Black Man. And it's on the Songs in the Key of Life album. It goes through sort of the contributions that people of different races have made to America and the world, through innovations and inventions throughout time. Even the first line says, "The first man to die for the flag we now hold high was a black man," and that's Crispus Attucks. The guide of a ship on the first Columbus trip was a brown man. It's Pedro Alonso Nino. So Stevie Wonder did his homework.
Yeah.
And
that was before the internet.
I thought about that. Honestly, I thought about that this morning, that Stevie Wonder had to find a book in Braille, by the way.
Right.
But he had to find, books to research to find, to inform these songs that he wanted to create, which that's a level of commitment. So hopefully artists these days are employing their hearts and their minds to create songs that are going to bring enlightenment to the world. And I hope I've given you enough time to think of yours.
Well, so I'm gonna mention one. We have no control over what our guests choose to say or not say on this show, but you and I typically try to keep it pretty PG in this section of the show. So I'm just going to warn any listener that the title of this song is not necessarily PG. But the one that comes to mind is Mississippi Goddamn by Nina Simone. And she wrote that song in the 60s after Medgar Evers was murdered. And the thing about that song is it's not a song of hope. It's a song of despair. And I think we kind of like our, we kind of like our anthems to be, anthems of hope for obvious reasons. We want to believe that we can be better. We want to believe that, we can aspire to greatness, but sometimes there are dark moments in the life of our nation, and people are crying out from a place of despair. And I think as a song, the lyrics, Alabama's gotten me so upset, Tennessee made me lose my rest, and everybody knows about Mississippi, goddamn. It's just like,
that's an incredible lyric.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's so much said in those simple lyrics. And if I remember right, I think she debuted that song at Carnegie Hall for like a mostly white audience in the 60s. And it was sort of like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like
well,
this is real.
Yeah, and then or now, if you're more offended by the use of that word than you are by what she's singing about,
right?
If you're more offended by hearing that word than you are about what happened, and what is happening and what has happened, then you probably need to check your priorities anyway.
Exactly. And I the Bible talks about like the groaning of the Spirit.
Yeah.
And to me, that is a song that is the sound of a spirit groaning in the face of just injustice and the way that during that civil rights era that people were just murdered for trying to stand up and trying to call for what was right. It to me, that song is powerful.
Yeah.
So that's the one that kind of pops into my mind is kind of the quintessential civil rights anthem.
Well, I think, and all of us sort of respond to world events in different ways. And, you and I tend to run to music, Yeah. So it's, I think if you're a listener of this podcast, you may be the same way. So hopefully those are a couple songs that you can check out and just sort of, just deepen things, your understanding and even just understanding where these artists are coming from.
Yeah.
So we honor Dr. King today, thankful for that legacy and what it's meant to all of us.
Absolutely. And I think it's really appropriate today that we have Ani Difranco as our guest, who has been a real social activist in addition to being a brilliant musician, singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, poet, everything else that she is. She has really kind of carried that banner for social justice, kind of, I would say, connecting her to that legacy of great 1950s and 60s protest singers. So to me, it feels appropriate that on this day when we reflect on peace and justice, that we have the opportunity to talk about Ani, who has also been a huge feminist advocate, and to go from talking about Phil Spector, who has committed some real atrocities, to seeing that we can see that darkness in humanity, we can see that violence, we can see that misogyny, talking about the sort of things that Stevie Wonder and Nina Simone were reacting to. We can see that the murderousness, and we can see the darkest qualities of the human heart, but we also see these people like Martin Luther King, like Ani Difranco, like Nina Simone, like Stevie Wonder, people who are saying, you know what? We can do better. We can focus on who we are as a people, who we are as a nation, because we know that we want to be a place of equality, a place of justice, a place of peace. And so we're going to call people to that. So I can't think of a better guest to help us honor King's legacy this week as we it needs to be more than a day that we think about what Martin Luther King has inspired in our nation. So it was great to speak to Ani, somebody that I've admired for a long time, and I'm excited to share this interview with our listeners.
Well, I don't think I can add much to that. That was pretty well said. So how about I let you have the last word? So you want one more word?
Yeah, I'm just gonna pick a word.
Okay.
Sandwich.
Part 2.
Singer, songwriter, musician, producer, poet, author, spoken word artist, activist, and entrepreneur Ani Difranco has released more than 20 independent studio albums on her own label, Righteous Babe Records. Though often classified as alternative folk, Difranco's musical influences span a range of genres. After relentless touring, she reached a wide commercial audience in the late 1990s and early 2000s with albums such as Little Plastic Castle, Up, 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 Reveling, Reckoning, Evolve, Educated Guess, and the gold-certified live album Living in Clip. The Grammy winner and 9-time nominee achieved her sole top 40 hit as a songwriter when Alana Davis covered the Difranco classic 32 Flavors in 1997. The prolific and critically acclaimed performer developed her own uniquely percussive guitar style and has collaborated with a range of artists, including Bon Iver's Justin Vernon, Bruce Cockburn, Pete Seeger, Utah Phillips, Maceo Parker, and Prince. In addition to releasing her own music, Difranco's label has issued recordings by Sarah Lee, Andrew Bird, Nona Hendricks, and others. Ani was one of the first musicians to receive the Woman of Courage Award from the National Organization for Women and was honored with both the Woody Guthrie Award and the Southern Center for Human Rights Human Rights Award. Her memoir, No Walls and the Recurring Dream, was released in 2019 by Viking Books. The New Orleans-based Difranco's latest album, Revolutionary Love, is a timely social statement scheduled for release on January 29, 2021. Ani, welcome to Songcraft.
Hey, thanks for having me. That's quite a list of guests you've had. Beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
That I know, right. You didn't just tell your audience, but you just told me, and it's a wonderful list. I'm jealous of your job.
We're excited that we get to add Ani Difranco to that list today. This is very cool for us.
Me too.
You have a new album called Revolutionary Love. It's a pretty soulful record with lots of vintage keys and organs, some very rootsy steel guitar, and even some 70s-inspired strings, flutes, and percussion. It's a really cool sounding project, and I understand you recorded that in North Carolina. This is your 22nd solo studio album. In what ways did you approach the process differently this time around?
How did I approach it differently? Well, it was a pandemic, so everybody was approaching everything differently. And normally I have a little home recording set up, as people do in the 21st century. So normally I would just have my bass player and drummer come here to my house, and we would record a record, and then maybe after the bed tracking, I would say to myself, what does this album need? And I might invite some people to overdub, but none of that was happening during the pandemic. You know, it didn't seem like a cool thing to ask people to fly in and be in an enclosed space together, and so I was talking to my friend Brad Cook, who lives in Durham, North Carolina, and he had lent me this guitar that I wrote most of these songs on. And I'm talking to him, and I'm like, how am I want to make a record? And I want it out by, the election. And what the hell am I going to do? And he just basically said, come to Durham, give me a week. If you can get your ass to Durham, I'll do the rest. And he booked me in this little studio in an abandoned strip mall, basically, with a bunch of dudes I'd never met. These, friends and associates of him that are skulking around in the woods there in North Carolina, including his brother, Phil Cook. And as it turns out, there's just these terribly enlightened, beautiful, gracious musicians just skulking around up there. And he put us all in masks in this little studio for about 4 or 5 days. And we just tracked this record like we were never going to see each other again, which, is possibly the truth. We just kind of made it happen. So that was a little bit unique, just going to a new location, working with a host of new people, except for Brad. I'd never met anybody before we sat down to record.
Yeah. Wow. Your musical career has been intertwined with your social activism from the start. But this album seems to put a particular emphasis on the political divide as you wrestle with the ideas of finding points of connection. The song Do or Die, for example, says, and I know you've got to fight your adrenaline just to be a gentleman, and I know I've got to fight my amygdala just to keep hearing you, but we can do this if we try, if we do this like it's do or die.
And there's models wielding microphones, chasing maniacs around, and everything's on fire, and there's twisters touching down, and I know you got to fight your adrenaline just to be a gentleman, and I know I got to fight my amygdala just to keep hearing ya, but we can do this if we try. Yeah, if we do this, like it's do or die, we can do this if we try. If we do this, like it's do or die.
In a similar spirit, the title track has lines like, I will ask you questions I will try to understand, as well as, and even if you hurt me, I will not shut down. Talk a bit about this sort of common ground theme that runs through the album.
Well, first of all, I think we need to make a spoken word album where you just speak all of my lyrics, because that was pretty fun. But we'll do that later. Yeah, well, it's becoming more and more complicated, isn't it, in this modern and now pandemic-driven world. And I don't know. I guess, every one of my records is just it's like, a landscape painting of the terrain I've been moving through, in my life. So, yeah, I guess for me lately, the last few years, I've been, and maybe my whole life up till then as well, just, struggling for connection, struggling, pining, aching for connection and understanding. And I think, I certainly see, as we all do, our society driven further and further into disunity and division and disconnection, and further into this cancel culture where if somebody pisses you off, you kick them off the planet. And, this sort of dead end streets everywhere you turn. And I feel like as I saw my society around me coming closer and closer to crisis in this area, I also was experiencing that in my personal sphere, my life, my real life, my marriage, like for years, just growing further apart, but aching for the opposite, and not knowing how to be the one to take the first step, how to even embark on the journey towards healing, towards understanding. So I think a lot of these songs, for me, I'm always so intrigued when the most personal, heartfelt heartache that I can express is also the most macro political statement that I, when they're one and the same, I get very, creatively turned on and intrigued by that. And so I think a lot of these songs, I may be obviously talking about my society and my relationship to it, and I may be obviously talking about my personal relationship, or I might not even be sure myself, So that's where I think just all of these songs live.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I think people, they'll look at a moment in society and say, well, I don't want to address that artistically until I feel like I have some answers. But in some ways it's like, well, no, I just want to have the right questions.
Yeah. Answers are a trap. I think you're onto something. The right questions is really more essential, because the wrong questions, there just are no right answers.
Well, people in our position of asking these, musical questions and analyzing music, we're always sort of parsing through the music and finding, what does this sound like or feel like, or where did this come from? And, there's a song on your record, Chloroform, and I hear these sweeping, dramatic string arrangements and the drum sound of it, and I'm like, I hear some Beatles touches in there. But I don't necessarily hear a ton of Lennon and McCartney influence in your body of work as a whole. And I'm curious, what were the things early on when you first started sort of, thinking about music and listening to music? What were the things early on that influenced you?
Well, I did listen to a lot of Beatles in the beginning. Like, that was my jam. I had the Beatles complete songbook when I was single digits, and those were all the songs I learned first. So, I guess I've been on a long musical journey since then, but it's deep in there, so maybe it's rearing its black, shiny head, the Beatles influence. So, yeah, I mean, I've always been, I've always been hard pressed to talk about my influences, which makes me feel like a jerk because I would love to pay homage and credit where it's due at every turn, because there are so many people who have affected me so deeply. But I find for all of the, sort of self-consciousness and navel-gazing involved in being a singer-songwriter, I don't know. Why am I singing this way? Why am I to actually analyze myself? I feel reticent to do it. And so it's hard for me to get there. But I know there's, that there's Beatles deep in me, and I love the kind of childlike, though Lennon and McCartney are awesome team, of course, like the whole Ringo Starr childlike, approach to rhythm, and I super have that lust in me. I think that he put long ago. I in my teen years, I moved to a lot of soul music, a lot of 70s. I sort of backtracked a couple decades and I sank deep into the 70s. So certainly on this record, I'm like deeply, deliciously pleased to hear, hints of Curtis Mayfield, who's one of my heroes all time, not just as a singer and being and spirit, but as an indie label starter and just politically aware person, and I just love him. So I don't know, maybe there's all of these kind of secret Ani ingredients that are bubbling to the surface.
Well, I understand that your home life was fairly turbulent and you basically struck out on your own at the age of 15. What role did creating music and writing lyrics play for you therapeutically as you were, navigating kind of the trauma, for lack of a better word, of like becoming an adult when you were still a kid?
Yeah. It was everything. Music. It was almost everything. In the early years, I also danced a lot and moving my body and taking dance classes. And then the dance studio that I hung out at, they just let me hang out endlessly and take all the classes. I was kind of like the kid at the boxing, gym that doesn't go home. And so that was very healing. But music, wow, I don't... whatever. It's a cliche and so many people live it, but I'm just one more. Like, I just don't know how I would have gotten through without my guitar and that portal, to expressing and healing, just singing it, just saying it, singing it if you want to, out of your body, even if nobody's there and nobody's listening, is medicine. So that's what I started doing. And then, I feel very fortunate that as a kid, somebody handed me an instrument, which doesn't happen to all kids. I asked for it. I said, Mommy, Daddy, I want a guitar. I don't know why I said that, but I was serious. And they humored me, and I am so blessed because, especially kids who struggle or they are surrounded by struggle or unhappy adults, to have an outlet is just huge. And to be given an instrument, especially for a girl, is not a blessing that every kid has. So the fact that I was given my guitar at early enough, I was 9 years old, and I was able to grow up with it and into it and make the guitar an extension of my body. That's the most liberating circumstance of all, where I was not only given a space and a way to do music, but a tool that I could really become intuitive and free with. And that was really freeing and emotionally, helped me heal my way through it.
Yeah.
Well, in 1990, you released your self-titled debut album on your own Righteous Babe Records. And I remember back in those days that Scott and I actually knew each other then in high school. And, your name would come up as this sort of champion of DIY, music, do-it-yourself music, along with, people like Fugazi, and that album featured now classic songs from your catalog like Fire Door, Out of Habit, and Both Hands.
And the old woman behind the pink curtains and the closed door on the first floor, she's listening through the air shaft to see how long a swan song can last. And both hands, now use both hands. Oh, no, don't close your eyes. I am writing graffiti on your body. I am drawing the story of how hard we tried.
And that album, of course, is all acoustic, and it's a reflection of how you were performing at the time. In what ways did being a one-person act with one guitar influence your approach to songwriting in those early days? Since you really knew the precise potential and the limits of how a song could be delivered to an audience because you were recording them that exact way.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, music from the beginning was a pretty solitary endeavor for me, as a circumstance would have it. I have long envied the members of bands in this world, because it's just the grass is always greener, I guess. But for me, music was just something that lived in my guitar, and I would go to my guitar and I would pull it out and it would transport me. And so that's how I learned to ride. I started performing solo, and you basically, I'm a kid with an acoustic guitar in the corner of a bar, trying to desperately, again, as we started this conversation, trying to connect with somebody and feel not alone and feel seen and feel connected. And of course, everybody else in the bar just wants to have a beer and talk to the cute girl next to them and couldn't give two shits about me. So I had to develop all these survival skills. And I think my guitar sound, was the first thing to kind of lean in that direction of hey, over here. And then, you got to somehow capture their interest and keep it. And, the being your own sort of bass player and drummer, to keep people grooving and engaged, and then, try to lay stuff through their eyeballs and through your lyrics and shit into their brain. That was my quest, how to be enough at all times.
It's interesting that you say that because, I listened to songs like Anticipate from 1991's Not So Soft or God's Country from 1993's Puddle Dive. And, you really hear that unique rhythmic acoustic guitar style.
I should recognize that fierce look in his eyes. I've seen it in my mirror so many times. He's gonna put his 2 cents in, cause he's got a gun. But I'm gonna put in 3, cause history owes me 1.
Very percussive, and you use these alternate tunings, and it's, when you hear it, you're like, oh, that's Ani Difranco. It's very distinctive. And it's fascinating to hear how that sort of directly emerged from kind of that live setting, the need to capture attention and to be able to play a full sound and stand out.
Yep. Yeah. I definitely, when young people come to me and they're like, how do I get, to where you are, in a bus with curtains in the window. And, I just say gigs. Go play for people.
Yeah.
Go play for people outside of your room. Don't fool yourself. You can't, because those are your teachers. The world is your teacher, and so, and it's going to change you, and it's going to push you, and it's going to scare the shit out of you, and it's going to challenge you. And so I think that's, I'm glad, I guess, that I just started pushing my way into bars and into the world with my music when I was way illegal. I'm 15, 16, playing in bars and running the open
Right.
mic and learning how to play songs for people. And I think, the sort of unique sound, the Ani D thing that you can recognize when you hear it, like you say it, that came to me from the world, So I don't think I would be the same animal if I was sort of navel gazing at home all that time.
Yeah. The first Ani Difranco CD that I bought was 1994's Out of Range, which came out when I was in college and was myself just trying to figure out how to write songs of my own. And there are a lot of classics on that record, such as Buildings and Bridges and Overlap, but it was the title track that really caught my ear, and especially that opening verse. Just the thought of our bed makes me crumble like the plaster where you punch the wall beside my head, and I try to draw the line, but it ends up running down the middle of me most of the time. There's it's this percussive and clever wordplay and alliteration happening at the same time as there's kind of frightening scene is being described. And I remember hearing that and just marveling at the craft of how the lyrics were structured in a way that allowed them to be delivered almost like another instrument in the song.
Just the thought of our bed makes me crumble like the plaster where you punch the wall beside my head. And I try to draw the line, but it ends up running down the middle of me most of the time. And boys get locked up in some prison, girls get locked up in some house, and it don't matter if it's a warden or a lover or a spouse. You just can't talk to them, you just can't reason, you just can't live, and you just can't please them.
And we've talked about your, guitar style, but talk a little bit about your approach to lyricism, to how you constructed words in those early albums.
Yeah. Wow. Well, first of all, bless your heart for buying my record when you were 20 nothing and I was 20 something else, and for actually listening to what I was trying to do with my words and my art. And when you were just describing that and remembering Out of Range moments, I was over here secretly crying. Not so secret anymore, I guess. Just like, it's wild how isolated this, because of the pandemic. I haven't played music for anyone in a while. And I sort of wonder if that identity or job or even really happened, or does it still exist? And the idea that somebody I don't know in college dorm somewhere just actually really deeply checked in with and met me where I was going creatively is like, wow, what a gift. But yeah, what was I doing with my words? I was trying to make music. Like you say, I think I got turned on by the music of language. English, unfortunately, the only language I know, although I have been deeply turned on by the music of many languages I don't know. And it's actually quite liberating to listen to Brazilian music and be freed of meaning and just tap into the music of Portuguese or, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, the music of English that we sometimes forget to notice or revel in because we get so locked up in the meanings of what's being said to us. But for me, I remember the moment I learned the word prosody. Is that how you say it? Do you know this word?
Yeah.
About the rise and fall of the melody with the lyric.
Yeah, so exactly, like the music of speech. How do you say what you say? What is the da? What's the melody that goes with what you're trying to communicate? And I remember when I learned there was a word for that, and of course words cement ideas and illuminate them in your consciousness. And a long time ago I learned that word, and it was so affirming to me. It's like, yes, that's what and that's one element of what I am subconsciously pursuing when I'm writing songs. Like, how to make the meaning of what I'm saying impact through the melody of how I sing it, through how to make the rhythm convey things, and the way the rhythm of the words interacts with the rhythm of the guitar. What does that say? Who is somebody pushing somebody else, or is somebody pulling back, or not that all of this is conscious, but I think it's all subconscious pursuits that you recognized.
It sometimes makes me think about people that say, how long it takes when they're getting ready to make it look like they just rolled out of bed. They work on their hair to make it look like, just that windblown look. And I think lyrics, when it comes to that conversationalism and that prosody, can almost be the same way.
Yeah.
Where it's like, man, I really want to labor on this so it sounds like it just fell out.
Yeah. Yeah. I do feel victorious in a secret way when people call my writing conversational. Because it's exactly right. I think you have no idea the labor that goes in to making you think that just was something I just mumbled. Yeah.
Well, another song on the Out of Range album that deviates a bit from the early emphasis on acoustic guitar is You Had Time. And that one opens with a 2-minute piano intro, and then that kind of weaves itself back in during the final minute of the song. In what ways does working on a different instrument open up different channels for you in terms of your songwriting instincts?
Oh, I wish I knew more about all the ways that different instruments can. I mean, I think the most that I usually do is I pick up different stringed instruments, different guitars. I have a baritone guitar and a tenor guitar, and sometimes somebody hands me a ukulele or, and things that are in my ballpark that I can get around. But yeah, I mean, a piano is like dizzying to me. And then, sitting behind a drum kit can bring out something totally different. And I feel like I used to be deep enough in music where I was pre-kids, grown-up BS. And I just played music all the time, and I was completely free to, and I had a band, and I was surrounded by musicians, friends, and they played me music, and we played music together, and sometimes we handed each other our instruments, and I felt like I was deeply immersed earlier on in my life, deep enough that I could sit at a piano and kind of improvise, though I never learned how to play piano or anything but guitar. And for sure, it scrambles and re-shifts the brain and the sensibilities straight away. It's very, very fun.
Yeah. Well, in terms of larger audiences becoming aware of your work, 1995's Not a Pretty Girl album was a bit of a turning point. You received your first Grammy nomination for Best Female Rock Vocal Performance for the song Shy. And the album also featured 32 Flavors, which went on to be covered by Alana Davis and became your only top 40 pop hit as a songwriter.
Flavors and then some. God help you if you aren't ugly, girl. Of course, too pretty's also your doom. 'Cause everyone harbors a secret of hatred for the prettiest girl in the room. And God help you if you are a phoenix and you dare to rise up from the ash. 1,000 eyes will smolder with jealousy while you are just flying high.
As someone who is extremely independent and grassroots oriented, how did that experience feel for you? How was that moment of kind of wider recognition of this sort of very self-contained thing that you had built?
How was that moment? It was a long, slow motion moment. Well, as you say, it was maybe 10 years, right? From when I'm a teenager, beginning to hone my craft in bars in Buffalo, to when Not a Pretty Girl kind of hits the radar of alternative culture, if not whatever, just pop culture.
Right.
And And of course there was the headline is, overnight success. Here's this out of nowhere. Who's this? And so at that juncture, another slow motion moment began to play out, which was, fame, my little dalliance with it. I never got to those upper echelons, probably thankfully, and in fact, I think at the point, Not a Pretty Girl and then Little Plastic Castle, playing arenas, say, when I got to that point in the late 90s, early, turn of that century, it was hard. It was dizzying. It was inappropriate for me to be with this music that you recognize as being very simple, very specific to myself and my little guitar. And now I'm in this huge space where I don't put on that kind of show. There's no lights and dancing or so to speak, that kind of spectacle. It's about diving deeper and deeper into sort of intimacy with me, So imagine me in that circumstance. It was hard. And again, a girl who sort of felt alienated as a kid, seeking connection through music, is now the only point of connection I'm offered is frantic adulation, is screaming people who want a piece, who want a hair sample and a hug and two hugs and a piece of your clothing. And like, what connection is that? So it was challenging, and it put, I feel like it was a good, 20 years of moving through and then further and further away and back out of that frenzied moment. And looking back, I don't think that frenzied peak was my best. It was good for me as an artist or a human. I think I did a lot of flailing, which is, looking back, kind of a bummer if you're me, to feel that the moment when 10,000 people showed up, I was lost, but maybe that is what it is, as I said, like what it should be, because, when there's 1,000 people or less, which is more typical now, I am very much at home and in my skin once again and able to do what I come to do, so.
Yeah. In some ways I think I hear some of that wrestling in the title track of your album Dilate from 1996. I mean, that was your first album to appear on the Billboard charts. I mean, there's a lot of staples of your catalog on that record, including Untouchable Face, Napoleon, Shameless, and Joyful Girl. But when I listen to the track Dilate, this one is particularly personal and vulnerable.
When I need to wipe my face, I use the back of my hand. And I like to take up space just because I can. And I use my dress to wipe up my drink. I care less and less what people think. And you are so lame, you always disappoint me. It's kind of like a running joke. It's really not funny. And I just want you to live up to the image of you I create. I see you when I'm so unsatisfied. I see you when I die.
Can you tell us a bit about writing that song?
Yeah, I was in a state. I was having a time. I was in a forbidden love affair with my, sound guy, who had a girlfriend, So, a lot of the songs on that record, it's like just struggling with myself, my own integrity, my desires, my loneliness, my seeking, my and I think I had entered this I don't know, this completely visceral space. You know, I'm not sure how people can listen to most of my music, really, but bless their hearts that any do, you know, because it's really, there's a no holding back kind of full frontal exorcism going on half the time. And I guess that's the level, like you say, the level at which I was struggling and needing the level of energy in my body that needed to be released. And I had only music still at that time to do so.
Yeah. Well, to date, your highest charting album is Little Plastic Castle. And I remember getting that album when it came out and being completely pleasantly blown away when those horns kicked in on the title track.
And they say goldfish have no memory. I guess their lives are much like mine. And the little plastic castle is a surprise every time. And it's hard to say if they're happy, but they don't seem much to mind.
There's so many great tracks on that album, like Gravel, Swan Dive, Fuel, plenty of others. But As Is has become kind of an Ani Difranco standard.
And I got no illusions about you. Guess what? I never did. When I said I'll take it, I meant as is, as is, as is, as is.
To me, that song works as a completely honest and unsentimental love song, or kind of as a song of resignation. And I think that song can actually be interpreted as either beautiful or kind of sad, or maybe both.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that song?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I love that song myself. Of all my songs, that's one of my favorites because it's like, it's a bigger me that's singing there than, maybe the me of Dilate or other songs where I'm smaller and I'm grasping upwards out, As Is for me. I feel like I'm also a huge Bill Withers fan, and I so love the place that I'm going to stay present tense because I just have to, that he sings from, this benevolent, loving, compassionate place that he writes and sings from. And I feel like that's the little bit of Bill Withers in me coming out in that song, for instance, As Is. Like, it's really a song I wrote to a friend, one of my friends and associates that I worked with for a long time. And, touring and traveling is like being married with people. It's very intense, being in a band with somebody. It's a type of marriage, as anybody knows who's there. And so, it's a relationship song for sure, in that sense. But it's just about like, I accept you, I accept you. I love you. You don't have to put on a show for me. I don't think you're perfect. I don't think I'm perfect. I'm still your friend, and I will always be your friend. It just sort of, I guess, I don't, for myself, it's not a place of resignation. It's a place of acceptance, and it's a place of compassion.
In the 1990s, you pretty much put out an album every year. except in 1999 when you somehow managed to release 3 albums in a 12-month period. Up, 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 Up. Then a duet album with Utah Phillips called Fellow Workers. And finally, To the Teeth. And the title track on that latter album is a pointed critique of gun violence and the ties between the gun lobby and politicians and the media. There's no shortage of artists who write about political or social issues, but it's really woven into the fabric of your art in a way that seems so crucially intertwined. Give us your thoughts on how, for you, activism and art are tied together.
Yeah. They come, activism and art for me come from the same place. The need to be whole. And as far as I know, one cannot be whole when you're surrounded by broken people. You cannot save yourself alone, So, yeah, everything that makes me march in the streets or write a political song or write a letter to some, authoritative entity or whatever I'm doing, it's the same thing that makes me sing. It's like I feel like that is so anyway. It's that motivation to heal myself and others and to connect us and to make us stronger in our sense of ourselves and connected to our purpose and our potential. Like it kills me on a moment-to-moment basis how we are unable to realize our potential, because of so many factors in society thwarting so many people. And the collective loss of potential, patriarchy hurts men, racism hurts white people. It's like we are all being brought down by these destructive forces. So I think it's all wanting to transcend that, wanting to rejoin with my fellow, with the consciousness all around me. Whenever I'm, again, like those questions that, like the question of what is the relationship between politics and music for you? Or so it's like relation. So those are different, or wait, it's two things. And, for me, it's like, it's a blurry thing. And on a motivational level, it's the same.
Huh. Yeah.
Well, I can't go through this interview without asking about the fact that Prince played on the track Providence on the To the Teeth album. And of course, you played on his song, I Love You, But I Don't Trust You Anymore. You are, kind of known as this solo, solitary creative force. And I don't see a whole lot of co-writing in your catalog. But when it comes to collaborating creatively with a guy like Prince, I would think that anyone would jump at that opportunity, but also maybe be a little freaked out by that opportunity. How did that come about, and how was that for you?
Oh, dude. I mean, I jumped sky high when he looked my way, and whatever what did you say? I was just paralyzed with whatever paralyzes one in his presence at every moment, like just awestruck by him, which is, yeah, what a gift. I mean, I would love to freaking collaborate. I'd love to try to co-write songs. You're right. I've never done that. And I think it has a lot to do with that I'm just seen as a indie girl, USA. She does her own thing. And certainly that's how it's shaken down. And because I never wanted to wait around for somebody's permission or or help even, I just needed to do it. But I've been there, done that, and man, collaborating in new and unprecedented ways would tickle me to no end. I mean, yeah, Prince, wow. Some of the people I've been able to briefly collaborate with have, they are teaching moments. They are Prince, when looking back, that song Providence, I mean, one of these days I'm gonna do the naughty thing for an artist, and I'm gonna go try to fix my mistakes. I'm going to go and I'm going to find the master recordings of Providence, and I'm going to remix. I'm going to re-sing that motherfucker. I'm going to fix the whole track around Prince, and I'm going to crank him, which is what I should have done at the time. But bless him for, bringing his incredible spirit to that recording. I wish I had done it justice at the time. Doing when we met, I was playing in Minneapolis. He comes to my show. He's standing side stage. I'm standing next to him watching Maceo Parker play, another just titan of funky, badass music, one of my heroes. I'm thinking, do I die now? Is this dying happy? What is there lightning? And Prince says, he invites me to Paisley Park the next day to play on. I'm working on a new record. You want to come play on it? And what do I say to him? Cheeky little thing that I am. I was like, okay, if you play on my record. So that's how that went down. He sort of laughed at me like, all right. So I show up. So that's how he ended up on Providence. And I showed up the next day, and I'm sitting in the waiting room pooping in my pants. They're like, hold on, he will see you in a moment. And then finally, dude comes out and he's like, okay, he's ready. And Prince has just freshly tracked that piano ballad, I Love You, But I Can't Trust You Anymore. It's solo Prince and his piano. And then he turns to me and he's like, okay, it's in G. And I'm like, no, you didn't. No, you did not just say that to me. Like, first of all, self-taught little Buffalo folk singer chick doesn't know G from Q. I'm like, okay. This is the part where you think I know how to play guitar like people who, know what the fifth and the fourth and the tonic or whatever the hell all that is. So I'm really, so I'm like walking into the tracking room, the other side of the glass, his old school Paisley Park studio. And I'm crying. Because now I'm going to crash and burn in front of my hero, and it's horrible. And I'm paralyzed with fear, and I'm picking out, and I'm fiddling on my guitar as I'm walking, like, okay, that note seemed to fit in what I just heard. Bing, bong, bing. Okay, there's four notes that I think go in G. And Lordy knows, I just played those four in that order and it was a one take. And then he was like, I'm rolling back to the bridge before I even, and then it was over in 4 minutes. And he was like, great. Let's go watch the fireworks. It happened to be the 4th of July, too. And then he sent me this note saying he was over the moon with what I played. And I was like, what?
I could tell from the moment you walked in the room that it wasn't your dress you had on, that wasn't your perfume. And what happened to the ring that I gave you? What am I to assume? I love you, but I don't trust you anymore.
I mean, wow. I guess I succeeded at least in the less is more. I wished I had had time to think about it and listen as I do and hear what it is that I hear and want to offer. But no, I was on the hot seat. That's what he loves to do to people. And somehow I didn't get ejected. I'm just grateful for that.
Amazing. Well, the 2001 double album, Reveling Reckoning, has two fabulous songs that sit next to one another on the track lineup. Gray is deeply personal and confessional, while subdivision is a societal observation about white flight and the urban communities that are left behind. And to me, these two songs sitting side by side are a fantastic representation in a nutshell of who you are as a writer. We've touched on the fact that you're not afraid to reveal your own soul, and you're not afraid to tackle big social issues. And the line between those, as you've said, is kind of blurred, that it all comes from a kind of similar place. I'm curious, when you sit down to write, when inspiration strikes, do you kind of think in terms of like, okay, today I need to really write something about myself, or today I saw something on the news that I need to address? Like, do you sort of categorize the songs in any way in terms of this is my personal statement versus this is what needs to be said? Or does it all just kind of blur and come from that same place inside you?
Yeah, no, I don't consciously bring that much sort of strategy or intention, I guess. It's really just what I am moved to express, and I suspect that the less I think about it and try to do something, the better. So the only thing I must admit that I try to do, and I've been flirting with this for a few decades now because I'm getting old and tired, and if that every single time I sat down with my guitar in the last 10 years, for sure, I would just write a slow loping 3/4. All songs forevermore will be very slow dirges in 3/4, unless I have to shake myself like, no, bitch, you do not want to walk on stage and make a show of all dirges. That's you're gonna make your job suck. So come on, get up, jog, run around, get your pulse up, look alive. Write something jaunty. Why don't you? Because it's just funny how the energy of my home life and even back before the pandemic and touring was still happening, and I come home and I just fall out, so the writing process becomes something only done in recovery, so these days it's hard to write, a rabble-rousing, fist in the air. I have to remind myself, Ani, your job is to go out in the world and inspire people and energize them. And so you're going to need some songs. So, that's the one thing that comes into my mind, only because I just know myself. I would just end up with all these waltzes.
Right.
As you've evolved as an artist, you have continued to release amazing albums that cover increasingly wider ground in terms of influences and explorations, including Reprieve, Red Letter Year, Which Side Are You On, and Binary. But you also ventured into the world of memoir, and you released your book, No Walls and the Recurring Dream, in 2019. You've written plenty of lyrics and poetry over the years, and we're going to have Scott do the spoken word version at some point. But in what ways was writing narratively about your own life? How was that a new experience in terms of flexing different creative muscles? I mean, it's a real different thing to try to communicate something in 4 minutes versus then sort of taking the boundaries away and say, okay, I'm just going to explore this narrative about my own life.
Oh, so different. So different. I feel that hundreds of songs and 30 years of making 4-minute songs and 3-minute and little skinny columns, poems, prepared me not for such an endeavor. It was like, what is this? This is also writing? Like, this is Greek. This, to me, this experience, I feel, I was expressing at the time, that songwriting, I think when it's best, is like an event, you align yourself with something that comes through you, this is something in the universe wants to come through you and out of you, and you find a moment, and you find your instrument, and and it happens, and it pulls together. Yes, there's often a lot of reworking, there's preparation for that moment. There's, let me dig in the journal and say, that idea, right, and then, wait, maybe that, but there is still an event to it. And I don't know, writing a book was like whittling to me. It's like it's an endless series of moments that all felt like tick, 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 tick. It was just like, what is this? Well, it was hard for me to gauge if it was good or bad or up or down, or it was like I didn't really even know. It was a new thing, new context, new format, deeper, way deeper into the exposure and vulnerability thing that I had been already known for, and then now it's like, that was nothing compared to write complete sentences about your life and what happened. Use the words mom, brother. It was just like, what am I doing? It was terrifying on every level. And I had, days and whole weeks and months where I felt, okay, there's a moment, I feel it, I think and then there was whole months where I was like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? What am I doing? This is a joke. I'm a joke. Who cares? Who cares about me? Why am I saying all, and in retrospect, unfortunately, I can say that I sort of end up more in that latter space of, oh my God, did I really do that? What? Why? Why did I do that? What? I really don't know now that it's been probably a few years since I was staring at that manuscript night after night, and I've my amnesia is kicking in, but I wonder, like, what did I say, and what am I gonna survive? Why did I do that?
Well, coming back to your new album, I want to ask about the track Confluence, which is an instrumental with this really great, I get kind of Isaac Hayes vibes from that, with the strings and the flutes and the percussion. It's just obviously a very different world than an artist alone on stage with an acoustic guitar. And you're somebody who has received a lot of acclaim and attention even in this interview for your lyrics. And then now you're expressing something in this instrumental without lyrics at all. And I wonder, when you've gotten so used to writing songs and communicating a certain way, was there ever a point in putting out an instrumental where you thought, should I put some kind of like little chorus on this, or should I do something? Or did it just feel satisfying to say, I'm going to let the music speak?
Yeah, it felt satisfying. And actually, for one of these days, if I live long enough, I think I'm going to make an instrumental record just to really fuck with their heads. I've been thinking for a few decades now, especially, again, when I used to hang out with my guitar all the time, when I was free to do that. I was making up songs. I was playing, instrumental songs all the time. And I thought, man, what a fun challenge it would be. I was thinking, like, so much of my music along my songs that have lyrics and that I'm known for is like about shaking people, shake it, wake up, and then what I want to do, what I hope someday maybe to do, is to make a record where there's no words and and it's the opposite. I want to make a record for people to fall asleep to. And, instrument based on the acoustic guitar, but maybe I can just fuck around with all kinds of sounds and instrument and yeah, completely liberate myself from this game that I've been in for all these decades of telling stories and trying to make a change, a positive change in my society or in myself, or or all of that struggle, all of that work, like to just play and to soothe myself and to not open my mouth and to not bare my soul, but to just revel in the guitar. Confluence, like, that was one of the 2 instrumental pieces on the new record, and it's a reflection of the beautiful musicians that joined me on this record and their voices that they have with their instruments. It started out with just that guitar groove, that sort of meditative guitar groove and that's what I brought to everybody. And I said, let's jam, and so I just sat on the groove. There's a little B section, and everybody just played along and created this magical place, And I think I did tell people I think I'm gonna write, a poem, and I'll probably speak a poem over this, and that was probably my intention as we were recording it. And then I thought just an inkling of what I was just talking about. Maybe this record doesn't need one more poem. Maybe it needs a breath, especially. And then, I put that piece of music, Confluence, after that song simultaneously, which talks about I live in 2 different worlds, this world that I'm talking in and moving through and engaging with and blah, blah, blah. And then there's my internal world, which is so different and so, and so the sort of instrumental journey of Confluence, that sort of meditative space, I thought reflected what that song simultaneously, the song before it, was talking about. Just going in to yourself and taking a breath and grounding again, so that you can go back into the ring.
Yeah.
So that I left it like that.
Another standout track on the album is Shrinking Violet, which has this haunting southern vibe and the unsettling lyrics. Yes, I sleep with one eye open and I hold my breath till dawn. I'm no shrinking violet, but I've got my head screwed on. You stood over me with a knife and you tried to take my life. It's no comfort you don't remember. It's no comfort that you've moved on.
You stood over me with a knife and you tried to take my life. There's no comfort you don't remember. It's no comfort that you've moved on.
I listen to that track and I'm just like, whoa, what? What's the inspiration for that song? It's so powerful.
Yeah, that was a tough one to sing. And it's funny, when I went to Durham and got together with this crew of strangers and got to know them over the course of 4 days, I didn't want to. I had recorded that song at home, and it was sort of secretly by myself, and I thought I'll just use that recording. I don't want to play that one again. Like I couldn't. I don't. No, that one's good. I think that one I'll just play. I don't know, on my ukulele alone. I don't. But Brad made me. He's like, no, just go play it. Just go sing it again. And I'm glad he did, because what the other musicians brought to this recording is really beautiful and makes me feel so accompanied in it. What is that song saying? Well, that is metaphoric. I can reassure you, the knife to the throat, but that's how it felt. It's about I mean, candidly, me and my partner struggled for years. I'm the breadwinner in the family. I leave town serially for weeks at a time. We got to this place where not only do we have one kid, now we have 2 kids. We have a new baby. He's a screaming baby. He screams. When his eyes are open, he is screaming. He doesn't sleep. And then we get a new puppy and he's shitting everywhere. And it's mayhem. And I'm still going on tour. We're barely managing as a unit. And now I have to go make the money. And it got so hard that we were aimed for divorce, and we were aimed for a struggle over custody. And what I was being confronted with from my partner felt that's the way it felt. When you feel that your children will be kept from you. So we did not break up. We did not get divorced. We still love each other, and somehow, though I was well into writing the breakup album with this new album, it came without the breakup. So, that's one of the more personal, that's the most deeply personal place that I felt scared to share on this new record. Because I feel like the me that's singing in it is paralyzed with fear, is weak and small. I show myself being afraid and small, and that's not usually the face I put on in public. So anyway, there it is, nestled in the center of the record, just sort of holding its breath.
Yeah. I think that what you just shared was real and honest, but also hopeful. You say, we did stay together. We did find a way through. And I think that what you experienced is very much reflected on this record. Revolutionary Love is a real and a raw, honest record in a lot of ways, but there's also this light and this hopefulness, this call to connection and unity throughout the album, and the way that works on, the personal relationship level and the society level, is just very cool. And it's been a real honor for us to talk with you today about, not just the new album, but your process and your career. And we obviously both very much admire what you do. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. And, this has been great.
Well, I'm so happy to hear you sum up the record that way, because that's what I hoped. That is exactly what I hoped, is that would be the feeling you were left with. That there's hope, that there's going to be a way through, and we're going to find each other.
So you did what you set out to do on this record.
Yay!
That's always nice.
I win again. Thanks so much to you both for this opportunity and this conversation.
Thanks for listening. We'd love to stay connected with you, so please take a moment to subscribe to Songcraft via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast app of choice.
If you like the show, we ask you to consider rating us and leaving us a good review. Word of mouth is important, and letting other potential listeners know what you think of the show helps us tremendously.
You can also sign up for our email list at songcraftshow.com and find out how to help support us at patreon.com/songcraftshow.
And you can follow us on social media by searching for Songcraft Conversations on Instagram and Songcraft Show on Facebook and Twitter.
And finally, be sure to check out our friends at the American Songwriter Podcast Network at americansongwriter.com. Thanks, as always, for listening and for your support.